Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Joe Gilder. Joe is a musician, songwriter, and producer living in the Nashville area. He's also the owner of Home Studio Corner. I found Joe years ago. Actually, it was like the first blog I ever found when I got started on my production journey. And yeah, I loved his style. Always been a fan. And recently saw that you became the content creator for the Recording Revolution. And I reached out, invited you on the show, which you've graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Joe.
It's my pleasure. Super glad to be here. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you've told a bit of your origin story before over the countless YouTube videos and other podcasts and stuff. But give us, it could be TLDR or however much you want to share about, your origin story, how you got started doing the thing you do.
I grew up in a fairly musical family and picked up a guitar in my teenage years, taught myself to play, wanted to be a rock star, discovered recording and audio kind of by accident, and ended up going to school for production. I didn't really know what it was yet. I just thought it sounded cool and knew next to nothing going in. I had recorded some stuff at home on my parents' old computer, and it was awful, but fell in love. I wanted to just be a rock star, and then fell in love with the technical side, being on the other side of the glass. I didn't realize how creative and fun it was and still is. And so that kind of led me down just further and further down that path of I still producing my own music, but also just loving that whole production process. So after college, I worked at Sweetwater Sound for a few years selling gear, and then I kind of, as a side creative outlet, started Home Studio Corner as just a place to kind of share stuff that I had learned about recording and audio and how to record and mix and all that. All the questions I would get from customers on the phone that I couldn't take 2 hours to answer, I figured I'd do some videos and post it online. So that was 2009, and it's just kind of been chugging along ever since. So it's been a wild ride, but I really enjoy it, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Was there like any aha moments along that journey, or I guess towards the beginning that said like, oh, this is it? What was like that thing?
I mean, I remember like I was hanging out at some friend, like in high school, hanging out at a friend's house, and he had installed this software. It was like Cakewalk Guitar Tracks or something. It was an 8-track recording software, but he showed it to me that you could record on different tracks and just basic multi-track recording, and I was just completely mesmerized. Like they all went to like play games and watch a movie, and I was just at his computer the rest of the night just messing with it. So that really, I tend to get obsessed about things and really into things for seasons, but that was one that went deep and tied into, I already liked music and enjoyed playing and songwriting and all that. So it just I was telling somebody the other day, I still get goosebumps when like that moment when a song comes together. Like it doesn't get old. Like you'd think after doing it so many times that it would be old hat, but I still just get so excited about it. So I'm just gonna keep doing it as long as it keeps exciting me. And I've had lots of fads come and go, like things that I've been interested in that go by the wayside, but music and production has never been one of them. So I'm gonna keep rolling with it.
So you're staying motivated.
Yeah.
Amazing. Were there any mentors along your journey? Like anybody that kind of helped point you in any directions?
I had a couple professors in college that were super helpful. I just, like I said, I came into learning about production knowing nothing. I'm jealous of like high school kids these days who have,
oh my gosh, everything.
They're way better than I probably am now. And they're just kids, and it just comes so easy. So it's like even watching my 12-year-old son, like he just can figure out like video editing just intuitively, like stuff that it's just fun to see. But I had a professor who he was just a good guy and taught really well, and he had worked at Sweetwater and kind of turned me on to that idea, and so that kind of, which led to Sweetwater, led me to kind of first time ever doing, it was my first job really, but it was also a sales job. So it was like commission sales. So you had to like, sell stuff. And I loved it. Like, I know some people would say I would hate that, but for whatever reason, that just connected with me. I could like educate
lit a
people.
fire under your butt too.
Yeah. It was the first time I'd felt like that. You talk about kids who like grew up and they were just entrepreneurial from the beginning.
Yeah.
That was never me, but this job lit that fire, and I started realizing, man, like this idea of being kind of if I can create value for people, it affects my income. That's just a cool dynamic. So doing that and selling things kind of led me to like, well, what other ways can I create value, which kind of led to that. So I think it's funny that kind of, all our journeys are very crooked, and there's left turns that you think should have been right turns, but you end up in a place. So like that one professor putting the nugget of an idea of working at Sweetwater really kind of directed a lot kind of where I am now. I don't know where I would be otherwise.
Wow, that value thing is also like such an important lesson. When you provide value for people, like things go well for you. And I think, I mean, that's been like a big key to my success, or I don't know how you measure success, but like what the success that I've found in this industry.
If you find out, you let me know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but no, because when just like giving value, people that lets people trust you, and then they continue to work with you over and over again once you've built that trust through that value.
If you can make a lot of money, that's great. But like kind of if you can get more, less, like that's the kind of the top level shallow thing. Like I want to do something to make money, but like underneath all that, like it gets kind of this feeling of like, oh, you shouldn't ask for money. That's a dirty, it's weird, it's awkward, it's whatever. But like how many of us love to buy things, right? Like I'm looking at like the guitars and that Hofner bass over there behind you. Like I bet you loved making that purchase, and people are the same way with really anything. So I think thinking in that terms of value versus how can I get money out of somebody, it's a more satisfying way to approach it, and tends to work pretty well too.
Yeah, I guess got to get out of that like what's the word when you're afraid of spending money, and think about that people actually might want to spend money if it's going to get them something they want.
100%, because we all have things that we may not be extravagant spenders in lots of areas, but there's usually one or two things where people are willing to kind of throw caution to the wind and spend a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I feel like a lot of people, me included, are afraid of like charging too much money, because it's like, oh, they're they can't afford it, or you empathize with the client, the artist, and being like, okay, it's hard, it's hard to spend money on music production or mixing or whatever it is, and it's like, but if you're providing something that's so valuable to them, they'll bend over backwards to pay for it,
Yeah, and especially in a kind of a very service oriented business like that, you only have so much time, right? Like you can't. There's only so many hours that you can devote to a project. So at some point, you can't. You got to make enough to support your family, and that probably means, you can't take on I was watching something recently. I can't remember what it was, but they were like, you can't cater to broke people for as your customers. Like nothing wrong with being broke. Like we've all been there, but like a broke person can't support your business. So that's probably not where you. So certainly shouldn't cater to them, because it's not going to provide enough. Anyway, I don't know how we got on income, but
I don't know either. But no, but it's something I'm thinking about a lot these days. That we have two kids now, and so things got real in a very literal sense, and it's like, okay, like if I'm not charging enough money, then I'm not earning enough money, then I'm not doing myself a service, because I'm just going to be out of business. So it's like,
right.
What does the business need to stand up? And it's whatever it takes to support my family at this point, for me personally. So.
And if you think of, the idea of I don't have to be for everybody, because I'm not going to be like, someone's going to work for you for a number of reasons. Price will be one of them, but also like they go, and I was listening to the reel on your website. Like I imagine you and I musically would get along because like of the style of like the way the mixes sound. I'm assuming you produce some of those too. And so like if you were like a super heavy death metal producer, which that's not something I play or know very well, we probably wouldn't have as many things in common musically. So like it's just the money's just one piece of it, and you only need like we only need a handful of customers and clients to be able to do what we do and make what we need to make. Like it doesn't have to be millions. And so like to me, like realizing like I don't have to cater to the lowest common denominator is a bit freeing. And then I can almost be a bit more choosy, which feels weird when sometimes you're in those spaces of feeling desperate. But like, there's a lot of
hopefully at some point, that's exactly the point. Yeah, like there's so many people making so many different kinds of music, and there's no reason why you can't cater to exactly the kinds of music you want to make. My buddy Carl Bonner, who's been a guest on the show and has done some business coaching for me, has basically said that. Like if you go on Spotify and you just see how many different artists there are, it's like it's crazy, and and so many, and you know, you could just literally listen to like different artists and see like, oh, this is an artist that I really like, but I think I could actually make better. That's like a perfect candidate for somebody to reach out to or to start connecting
100%.
with, because there's bound to be people that totally vibe with you.
And music's so personal, like whether you're doing it in person or like online collaboration, like it's such a, you're like up in their business, right? Like reading their diary kind of thing when you're working on their music. So like, of course they've got to feel connected to you and feel in a sense safe with you, but also like they need to vibe with you musically and all those other things too.
Yeah, I mean, this is super important. Like, I like to talk about how people, you know, find artists to work with them, or how artists choose to work with you. And this is like, like this is exactly that thing, you know, that personal, interpersonal relationship thing. Amazing. Wait, so these days you're working on your own business, Home Studio Corner, PreSonus. You're doing videos still for PreSonus, and now all like, you know, the music that you're working on yourself. And on top of that, now you're starting to do Recording Revolution videos. How did that happen? And how do you do it all? That's like the real question. Yeah.
So if you're not, I can't imagine anyone listening isn't familiar, but the Recording Revolution is the YouTube channel that was started by my friend Graham Cochran back in 2009, which was the same year I started Home Studio Corner. So we discovered each other very quickly, and there was about a half a second where he seemed like a competitor. And then the next second I realized I really liked him. Like he was a good guy. I could tell he was just like, we would get along, kind of like, you know, you just vibe with somebody. So instead of treating him as competition, we became friends, and I reached out to see if he wanted to do a podcast together. And if he wanted to we did lots of we like ran a business together, a mixing thing called Dueling Mixes for 7 years together, and did some in-person events here in Nashville. So it was just a cool relationship. But he just, it's a very good business person, and Recording Revolution took off, and he started coaching people in business stuff and stepped away from Recording Revolution doing the day-to-day content. And that was a couple of years ago, and they tried to bring a few different people in to make content that worked okay, but they just couldn't find someone to kind of really take the reins. And then I randomly, end of last year, reached out to him really just to say, hey, we haven't done anything together in a while. Let's do something. And he said, oh, I'm actually working on kind of shutting things down because I really want to focus on this new business. And I said, well, why don't you let me take it over instead of just stopping altogether? And so that kind of started that conversation, and we eventually kind of worked out a deal for me to kind of just come in and take over. So as we're shooting this, it's very fresh, very new. And I'm not trying to come in and like change everything. I just want to come in and just continue to do what I've been doing for the last decade of just create content to help people make music. However they're doing that in a home studio. But so it's just another place to like we talked about earlier, provide value. And the lines are so blurred between what I do at Home Studio Corner and Recording Revolution. So how those become unblurred, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But
we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like my 12-year-old loves. Are you familiar with the like food theory, game theory, film theory YouTube channels?
I'm familiar with game theory, the concept, but not the YouTube channels.
So it's specifically like video game theory, so not even like whatever anyway. This is a guy who has several different channels that kind of focus on different things. So maybe we'll figure out a way.
Cool. I got 8 years to deal with this.
Exactly. He'll be into it for sure. But your question was like, how do I do it all? It's one of those things. Like on the outside, it probably looks crazy and like I never stop working, but in reality, it's not that. I've gotten really good at doing a specific skill set, and so I can do things like shoot a video like from start to finish in a couple hours, like the whole process, right? So it's not a several day long process for me. It's a pretty quick. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to like efficiency. So I love like if I can find a good macro to do something for me that in one step that used to take me 4, I'm all over that kind of thing. So that's just kind of naturally carried over into the way I do the deliverable of creating content. And it's kind of the same with music, although music obviously needs more time. You can't rush that as much, but there are ways that you can obviously be efficient when it comes to making music too. So yeah, efficiency is a big part of it. So planning, I schedule my days. My wife actually does it to just kind of make sure I'm hitting all the things I need to do. But it's just like anything else. I just get efficient and then
You set
put it on the
aside
calendar and
time.
get it done. Yeah.
Are you using
I
like
don't do well with
Chat
with a
GPT to
blank
come up
slate.
with like ideas, or that's all from the noggin?
I've got a video coming out. I did ask Chat GPT to write a song for me, and it was pretty funny. It's a very formulaic approach. I was like, write a song about a turtle. And it like the chorus was, "Oh, Mr. Turtle, something, something, something." Like it made a poem. It's pretty funny. Pretty terrible.
Yeah, it is. There's some things that I don't think they're going to catch up on to us so quickly.
But when they do, watch out.
Yeah, actually.
Run for the hills.
Yeah, no, totally. So efficiency is the name of the game. How many videos are you shooting a week?
As far as like deliverables, there's usually one a week for each channel. So that's 3 for Personas, for Recording Revolution and Home Studio Corner. And then there's an extra for Personas every few weeks. There's a couple extras for them for different things. But that's about it. Then a couple of weekly emails. I do a print newsletter for a membership thing that I do. So like there's other stuff behind the scenes, but that's the main stuff.
So that like technically you could knock it out in a day or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Totally. I'm like just getting started with like the video thing. It's so hard for me. I'm like so like there's so much resistance because like make a podcast, fine, no problem. I'll make a podcast. It's audio, it's fine. I could deal with that. Once you open up like the visual thing, it's just like I finally figured out how to do like what's it called, ScreenFlow. I'm working on it. Well, there's some videos in the pipeline or ideas.
Good.
Of videos. But there's
such a cool concept.
There's resistance. There's resistance. For
Absolutely, it's a whole different thing. But I was surprised how much I loved the video side of things from a creative, even like editing standpoint. It's pretty fun to like bring kind of the editing sensibilities from audio, but then figure it out because you can't do it the same way in video. You can't have like the jump cuts. You got to figure out all that stuff. But yeah, it's fun. It comes naturally, just like you do in the intro of this podcast. We were talking before, and you're like, all right, let's do it. And then you go right into, hey, everybody, this is or whatever the intro is, right?
I put in the reps
done it
now.
Yeah, it's just muscle memory at this point. It's the same with all of it for sure.
Yeah, it's like if you do enough of it, eventually they'll get good and you'll get efficient at doing it.
Right. It takes a crap load of work to make something seem effortless.
Yes. I have a book behind me. I've mentioned it on a few podcast episodes called Start by John Acuff, I think.
Yes.
And he's just
John
like,
Acuff lives in my neighborhood.
Oh, okay, cool. So send
Isn't
regards. He doesn't know me.
I've not technically met him, but.
But yeah, it's a great book. It's just like, if you don't put that first foot forward, you're never going to get anywhere. So stop thinking about it and just do a few reps, right?
That is a good book.
Yeah, an important concept also. Wait, so let's talk about...
He also made one called Finish that I never read.
You never finished it.
Which is kind of ironic, but...
Nice. I didn't even start that one. So you're ahead of me. Amazing. Wait, so let's talk about a little bit about efficiency in the recording studio, because I know this is something that you harp on a lot. Like talk to us about different ways, maybe some ideas of how you could kind of get going quickly, finding that creative juice and just starting.
Well, I think for me, when I think about it, it reminds me of, so I talk about how being fast in the studio is important, not just for the sake of being fast, but if you've ever, I was talking about this with my buddy Lid Shaw recently. If you've ever been in like a Nashville session with a Nashville engineer, like they're flying. It's very fast. Not like specifically like once the session started and like they're sitting in front of the Pro Tools rig or whatever. There's just a speed there. And so when I was learning, because I learned Pro Tools first in college, and so when I learned it, a lot of it was about learning the key commands, learning how to do things fairly quickly. And I didn't quite get it, but then a few years later, I was a friend of mine, engineer, he's a live sound guy who wanted to kind of up his studio production chops. So he invited me over to just be the artist, to play guitar and sing on something so he could just kind of practice. So I went over, and I remember that it became painfully aware that he was just really slow at the little things, like for example, if I did a vocal and I said, cool, can I go back and double that chorus? What I would expect from, like, if I was in like a Nashville session was like this timing. Hey, can I go back and get that chorus? Yep, 1 second. Okay, let's go. 2 bars coming into the chorus, and then I'm singing. So what is that? 6 seconds. But with this guy, it was like, hey, can I do that? And it was like, I could watch him from across the room. I could see over his shoulder. It was like, click on the menu, new track, go. It was just, it took like 2 minutes. And so is that a big deal? No, on a micro level, who cares? But bigger picture, over the course of a whole project, that's a lot of time. But also as a musician, like I just sang it. I'm feeling so good about it. I want to sing it again as a double. I'm in the zone, like I'm my diaphragm's still like tight from like ready to sing, and then I have to just sit there and tap my toes.
Right, and you have the pitch like wet ready in your head,
Yeah, it's ready, and it just fades. And like, is that the worst thing in the world? Of course not. But that's kind of there's an element of, the whole like state of flow thing.
Yeah.
There's an element of like when I do vocal overdubs or something, like the music actually never stops. Like I rewind, punch in, like there's always music happening, and it keeps me kind of in this cool zone where I'm singing up, mess that up, rewind, singing, like it just goes and goes and has this flow to it. So it's more than just on the simple level. You get fast and efficient at something, that means you can do more of it, right? Which helps, right? Especially if you're getting paid by the hour or by the project, you can do more projects if you can do them faster. But then on the back end, as a musician, there's something about being able to stay in that flow and like, hey, it'd be really cool if we put a tambourine on this, and you can within 10 seconds have the new track set up and a tambourine ready to go. It feels really cool. It's like watching, when you watch a great live show. Are you a Radiohead fan?
Massive. They're my favorite band.
Massive. Perfect answer. So when Radiohead...
You see the smile...
yeah.
So that's a story for after the pod.
When I first tried to get into Radiohead, I just didn't get it. I was like, this is weird. Their time signatures are weird. I'm out. But then, decade later, I kind of rediscovered them, and they are just delightful. But there's that video, I'm sure you've seen it, of them playing the album In Rainbows in the basement.
It's the peak.
It is. I mean, that album's delightful. It's the one with like the Weird Fishes song and the opening song that's in like 15
step
15 step sequence, like crazy. If you haven't seen it,
Joe, you're in my zone right now. This is. I
told you. I thought we were going to connect musically.
For me, In Rainbows in the Basement is like the peak.
Oh my gosh.
It's like the peak of music almost. You know what I mean?
So if you haven't seen it, set aside an hour. Go find it on YouTube. There's a couple versions. They're high quality. It's well shot, but they're just in the basement, which is, I guess, in California somewhere. There's a little bit of a live audience, but they're just in a big circle, and they're playing through the album. And it's really fun to watch. Like, I'm sure there's edits, and it wasn't as fluid, but like they go from one song to the next, and like, because they do so many different things, like, on one song, dude's playing guitar, and then he puts the guitar down and sits down at a synth, or he switches instruments, but in the middle of a song. And it's just this fluid. The music never stops, and they do all these. They're doing like 12 different things as like a 6-piece band or however many there are. So to me, that's kind of the idea of being in the studio, being able to like pivot and like, especially in the recording phase, like, man, if you can have stuff ready and set up and laid out in such a way where you can quickly move from one thing to the next, it's just really fun. And of course you can have, like I did a project a few years ago where they came down from Pennsylvania and they only had 2 days to do like a 5-song EP. So very real sense, we needed to have the vibe and all the fun, but also it just needed to happen pretty quickly. So all those little time savers really add up over the course of a 2-day session.
Yes, totally. And it's also, I find like when I have like a tambourine or a shaker or something ready to go, and just like opening a new channel instantly, like it just wows the artist I'm working with, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then that totally solidifies the trust that you're building with them, and
totally.
And they'll come back again and they'll keep working with you because of that. Well, going back to like the interpersonal thing. Yeah. But workflow. Any other tips?
I mean, and then when it comes to like the mixing stuff, and I'm sure y'all have talked about mixing a lot here, like having a system and kind of a process really helps, because if you, from as simple as just like having like a kind of a base template that I set up, that I start with, that's the same, everything's the same color every time, like a lot of that helps me mix quickly, and trying to, probably the biggest efficiency is when I think everybody goes through this phase where you get into recording and you just want to mix, right? You see all the cool mixing plugins and videos. So you just speed through the recording process just to get something laid down so you can have fun mixing. And you mess up the recording and you don't make it sound very good. And then you spend all your time trying to fix a bad recording. I think people think that's what mixing is. And if you can get over that hump to the part of realizing, oh, the reason my songs aren't sounding as good as I want isn't because I need to get better at mixing. I really need to rewind and get better at the recording thing, both like recording technique and production and all that creative stuff. That at least for me as a person who loves technology, that the recording part's a lot of work, but like mixing's fun. I get to like bring in the new plugin and try a new routing thing and all those fun things. But if you don't get the first part right, the mix is, you'll always think of mixing as like this big Band-Aid rather than like the really fun creative tool that it is. So I found the better my recording sound, just raw, the more fun the mixing process is, of course, but also it goes by pretty quickly. I can, sometimes the song is 45 minutes and we're pretty much there, versus wrestling with a shaker track for 3 hours because you recorded it wrong, right? That's an extreme example, but yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I know also you harp on this, getting it right at the source.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, maybe you can harp on it on the podcast here.
Yeah, so I've been saying it for the actually back to Graham. So we did a podcast together called the Simply Recording Podcast that ran for a couple of years. We had 30 or so episodes. Wasn't nearly as prolific as this one, but we the very first episode was called Get It Right at the Source. We were like, how do we start this? We're like, well, that's the way to start it. And the idea has evolved over the years, because initially I just meant it as, I'm not saying I invented the phrase, but I've just harped on it so much. Originally for me, it just meant record it well, but that's expanded to produce it well. Like you can have a well-recorded, boring song, right? The guitar track sounds good, but it's boring. So like there's that element of recording and production being two different things. But then if you just keep going up the signal chain, you keep finding other ways to improve the source, like obviously equipment and things like that, but the song itself, the performer, maybe this person shouldn't be the one playing guitar on this. Maybe that's the wrong guitar. Maybe that's the wrong chord progression. Maybe those lyrics don't make sense. You just kind of keep rewinding, and there's so many things that constitute the source in my head, and all of those really need to be in place before that first recording session, or you end up, because once you record it, you know what it's like. You record it, and then you live with these things that you've done for weeks and months as you finish the project. So if you're going to have to live with it, you might as well take a little more time on the front end, making sure it's all right and good. Because then you're just kicking yourself, and it becomes a frustrating process.
Yeah. I feel like there's a balance there also, because I feel like, people have been talking about on the show also about just like, capturing and then analyzing later, because you don't want to ruin that inspiration, because sometimes you just need to get into it before you forget about it, before you lose that kind of momentum. And so I guess the balance is making sure that you're I don't know, you have good microphones in a good room. I don't know, stuff like that. Easily accessible. I don't know. Maybe there's got to be that balance between knowing you're going to get it right at the source, but also being open to that like initial burst of inspiration.
Yeah, and some of that is just you get to a point where like I don't slave over recordings anymore. Like I set up the mics the way I've done it 1,000 times, and I just check to make sure it sounds good, and then we just go. So it's not like it's 3 hours of A-Bing 8 different microphones on the snare, like that kind of obsessive thing. But I think in the beginning there needs to be some of that. Like I tell the story of when I was still working at Sweetwater, and I was working on an album of my own music, and I got a couple microphones, set them up in stereo, and I set aside a Saturday to record all the guitars for this upcoming thing. So I spent the whole day just knocking out guitars for like 10 songs. Really proud of myself. Took like 3 weeks off, right? Because that's what we do. And came back and listened, and they were all super muddy and boomy. I was in an apartment, and there were, noisy kids upstairs, and I was trying to get as close to the mics to minimize noise, but I got too close, right? And on the headphones I had, it sounded okay, because I was listening in the room, and it was the sound of the guitar and everything else, and just thinking about 1,000 different things, and the performance kind of being in that zone, like you mentioned, but I was just too close to the mics. And I ended up spending that whole that whole album fixing those guitars when it probably would have made more sense just to go back and re-record them. I think that's the thing. Like you do that a couple of times, you realize, oh, this thing I'm doing causes muddy guitars every time. Once I fix that, now like that's a mistake I don't make anymore because it was such a painful one to live through. But yeah, I think certainly it's better to capture something than nothing for sure. But I think also to recognize what you can and can't do later using plugins and things like that. Like there's only so much they can do.
Totally. I think in a way you sort of have to learn those hard lessons at some point to like, the one time I moved a file to the drive in the wrong direction and I erased everything I worked on, right? Like I don't make that mistake anymore. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't happen. But I guess I had to make it once.
Like have a pit in my stomach when you say that. That's such a real, oh man.
Sorry.
No, it's just such a real thing. Like, wait, what did I just, and it's gone.
And that's it. I think you could actually undo it on a Mac. I think you probably could Command Z it if you were smart and you realized that you did it on time. But if you've done like a million things after that, then it's too late. Too late to apologize.
The other day I shot it was probably like a 45-minute video. And I forgot to turn the camera on. Or I may have stopped. I may have not even started. I forgot to turn the camera on. So it was this, I nailed it. And then I go and look and there's only audio. I was so mad.
It's time to release it as a podcast, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And all the parts where I'm like, look at this. Like just imagine something's there. It's fine.
Yeah. But I imagine the second time you did it, though, you did it faster and even better.
Yeah. When that does happen, the second time tends to go a little better. So I guess it's fine.
Yeah. See, we have to make these
grateful.
We have to make these mistakes, right? In life, there's no Control Z though. That's the problem. Command Z.
That's true. Look at that.
Yeah,
that's a T-shirt right there.
Yeah, that maybe. let's talk about that after.
That's the big break for both of us is the Command Z T-shirt.
The Command Z.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wait, so I know you used to be a big believer in stock plugins. Simple over complicated. Is that still the case? Has anything changed for you over the years? What are your thoughts?
Not much. So it started off, I mean, it's kind of a shtick. Like, you don't need all the cool fancy plugins to get good sounds because it's, at the end of the day, it's just EQ, compression, stuff like that. But I don't even know how to say it. I think for me, it's more about just simplicity and not overcomplicating things than it really is about the sound itself. Like, for example, I used to use just the stock EQ and compressor in Studio One, almost on principle. And then they came out with they had these other ones that were like emulations of analog stuff. And I resisted going to it because I was kind of stuck in my ways. But then when I finally did, I realized, okay, these sound pretty good. And so then I have buddies who are like, well, you have to try the UAD stuff because that's going to sound even better. And I kind of stopped myself just because I know myself, and I would just go down an endless rabbit trail of A-Bing compressor after compressor after compressor and possibly not making any music in the meantime. So for me, it's almost just a kind of a self-regulating, like I just use what's there. And if I don't like the way it sounds, I've got lots of options just within what's included in Studio One, which is a lot. And I just kind of live with that limitation because I think we all need guardrails. Some people need more, some people need less. But I remember when I worked at Sweetwater, at the time at least, all the software companies would give you all their plugins as a sales guy. So they would just dump them all in your iLok and you could have whatever you wanted. And it was smart because if you used it, you're more likely to sell it. It made sense. I think I still have a bunch of those licenses on one of my iLok accounts. But I remember going to a friend's house and just playing around in his studio, and he went to put an EQ on a track, and the menu like filled up the screen because he had installed all of them, and it was like 90 EQs to choose from. And I just think, like,
yeah, that's crazy.
Decision fatigue. Like, I've got to come in here because what I would end up doing is just find the one that I like or two, and those would be all I would end up using probably anyway. Because by the time I'd A/B 8 or 9 of them, I'd be so sick of whatever I was listening to, or it's all subjective, or, like one's a little louder than the other, so that's going to make it sound better, but was it really better? Like those, I just don't have interest in those things. I'm much more interested I'm probably more in my head a producer than like a mix engineer or any kind of engineer, because I'd just much rather make something that sounds cool than like, you remember back when, this is probably 10, 20 years ago, that you could buy these CDs of like the ultimate blind split tests of like, they'd put like 70 microphones on a single source and you could get all the files. You could hear all of these famous microphones on the same thing. And it's just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
That's just, are there better things out there than what I use? Probably. Am I making stuff that I'm proud of? Yeah. So at some point there's like, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
for me at least.
I totally feel that. And I got carried away with, I was like, there was a plugin I wanted to buy from Plugin Alliance, and they had like, buy two, get one free. And then here you are, and you're like, oh, well, I got to get the third one, So which one do I choose? And then you're like deliberating over like plugins you don't need, just so you get the right third plugin to get that bonus. And as I was doing it, I was like, this is really stupid. Like, I don't need either of these plugins that I'm debating between. So just choose one and move on, or don't do it. Maybe it would be the smarter thing to do.
At the same time, we all have our things. Like, I've got probably more guitars than I need, right? I probably only need one or two to get the jobs done, but I have more than that. And like, I get into things like, I went through a phase where I was really into pencils, and I got into like Blackwing pencils, which are like $25 for a box of 12, which on the one hand you think, wow, that's really expensive for a pencil. And you're like, but it's only $25. Like, what can you get for $25? So it's just something that I enjoy. They're really nice. They smell nice, whatever. So like we all have things. So if you get a lot of joy out of buying a plugin, go for it. Wonderful. But if you've complained to me that you're not releasing any music, but you've bought 3 plugin bundles in the last 3 months, then I'm going to probably push back a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely the right balance for everybody, but I think that your outlook of like knowing yourself and what's right for you, what's wrong for you is super important. And also to not get carried away with, the stuff that you don't necessarily need. You know what works best for you. And maybe I just repeated myself. There was maybe another thought there. I don't know. My brain doesn't work anymore. 2 kids.
But I did a couple years ago get the FabFilter Pro L2 limiter. Because the stock limiter in Studio One, I realized I just couldn't do as much with it as I wanted to. It kind of would get crunchy if you pushed it too hard. And so my masters were coming out quieter than I really would like. I don't want to go crazy loud, but I tested it out and I was like, goodness, this is dangerous because you can just push anything into that thing and it sounds great always. So actually, anytime I'm doing a video now, it actually runs through the Pro L2 limiter before it goes and gets recorded.
How do you set it up for your videos that it's working like
so I use, this is where we can get a little techie. So I use Audio Hijack from Rogue Amoeba. It's a little standalone app that basically lets you put in little blocks of modules. So I have like my input, which is a mix on my mixer down here, a dedicated mix. And then I can have a block for a plugin, which I use for Pro L2. And then that gets sent off to Loopback, which is then what I use as my audio source for recording video.
Got it.
Which sounds more complicated than it is. It's really fairly simple, but
yeah. The stuff that people do to make things work for them, right?
I know. It's funny, like it really is like thinking about all the different, I'm sure you've had some of this, all the different iterations of ways to capture audio and video and get it all to work. It's funny, some of the, like I had this cheap little mixer, like 4-channel mixer, and I was running stuff. I ran my vocal through use the insert out to like a gate, like one of those old, where is it? That's over here. Like that old 3630 Alesis, like compressor gate, just because I wanted my voice to be quiet when I wasn't talking, but then it sounded weird and it sounded like I was gasping for air every time I took a breath because it's not that great of a gate. Like we just so many iterations of how can I make this work better. So this is the current one that's working pretty well. So I'm going to stick with it.
Nice. How do you, I noticed that you were like, this is so like inside baseball, but I noticed that you're like, you're listening through monitors and talking into the microphone.
Yes.
During the screen. How does that not like not become a big problem?
That's a good inside baseball question. So
this is like what I'm thinking about right now.
Of course. I mean, that's I would be wondering too. Like I can't sleep until I know how this works. So I use the Presonus Studio Live digital mixer as kind of it's sitting in front of me. So it's a digital mixer, USB to the computer. So it's where everything comes through here. So my mic is coming through here, obviously, and my playback from whatever software is coming through there. You're coming through there. But then, because what I wanted to do was be able to, I don't love doing videos with headphones on. A, because I get tired of wearing headphones, but B, I'd like to hear through my monitors, especially if I was doing like a mixing video. That's where I would mix. So it would feel weird to mix it on headphones just for the sake of video when I would actually be mixing it on my speakers. So I finally figured out, if I just, basically I solo the tracks that I want to go out to the speakers, and I have, now that I'm trying to explain it, I realize it's more complicated than I thought it was. So the solo bus on the mixer is what feeds the speakers. But then the actual mix on the board is what feeds the computer. So the only difference between those is the vocal mic is not soloed and going to the speakers. So it's the kind of solo that doesn't mute everything. It just like selects them. It's like it's a certain type of solo mode. So now like my DAW playback, my computer playback, your playback is going out the speakers, but my mic isn't. And then I've got a mix on the board that includes my mic that gets recorded into Studio One. Or into whatever the software is I'm recording with.
Is there is there also a ton of bleed into the microphone when you're doing that?
Good question. So then while I'm shooting videos, I've got my thumb on the mute button for that microphone.
Oh,
so when
genius.
I go to play something, I go to play, right hand hits spacebar, left hand hits the mute button on the microphone. So the mic is muted. Now there's other ways you could do it. You could have the mic recorded to a separate track, and then you could go manually mute it out.
Right. That sounds super tedious.
I mean, all I got to do is go boink with my thumb, and I got it good. So
simple is the best. Yeah,
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I can't. I don't think I could ever not have a physical mixer in front of me, if nothing else, just for the content part. Because like that workflow has probably saved me countless hours of post production and editing and headaches and all that stuff that I don't want to deal with.
Yeah, you got it. You're the streamlined guy. You got it all set up.
Mr. Streamline, yeah,
sick. Me. So speaking of streamline, let's talk about mixing. I know that you I don't know if this is still what you're doing, because I'm like super behind on your videos because life just got crazy for me.
How dare you? What did you have, a baby or something?
Yeah, like exactly that kind of thing. So you I know you used to do what you call top down mixing. So starting from like the stereo bus, moving down. Is that still what you're doing? Has anything changed?
Pretty much. So it's sorry. Go ahead. You finish.
Oh, and if it has, like, how so, and I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, so it's evolved a little bit over the years, but so that kind of the current iteration is, I use a template so that my mixes, if you were to pull up any of my mixes over the last several years, they would all look visually very similar. So like the drums are always blue. There's a bus for the drums. There's a folder for the drums. It's all kind of organized in a certain way. So that helps me just be consistent from one to the next. I don't have to search for a certain weird track, because even if you send me tracks, I'm going to put them into my system and my setup, and it's going to feel like something I would be familiar with. And then the static mix is still the all important step 2. So just getting levels and panning figured out before I start reaching for plugins, because that's a big mistake people make. They want to start slapping stuff on there and fixing a problem that might have been better fixed by just adjusting the balance between things. So getting the static mix and then fixing any major problems is kind of the newest piece of the puzzle. So like if there's a bass part that's just super muddy, or a guitar part that's got too much low end, or the vocals jumping out certain spots that's just annoying me during the static mix, I'll fix those things first. If there's like a ring in the snare drum, that kind of thing. Then I start the top-down process, which is not so much starting at the mix bus anymore as just mixing kind of each group of tracks independently. So like listen to the drums, put stuff on the drum bus first. It's kind of a game I play with myself. It's kind of like the name that tune game. Like I can name that tune in 4 notes. I can mix that drum track in 2 plugins is kind of the goal. If I can get it sounding great with an EQ and a compressor on the drum bus, without sacrificing anything, I just hit my mic, without sacrificing anything, then that's like a win for me. So it's kind of that game. And I do that on the bus level first for each group of tracks. And then I go in and do stuff on the individual tracks as needed. So yeah, the top-down thing I still do, more so on the bus level. I usually save the mix bus till later, once I've kind of figured out and fixed some of those problems and gotten things kind of more reined in. then I'll start doing the mix bus processing.
Interesting. Are you still like stereo bus compressing, or are you kind of leaving that for the groups?
Yeah, I do still, unless I forget, which sometimes happens. I'm still compressing. I try to do most of my compression on the buses, and then I usually have some sort of SSL type compressor on the main mix bus, just kissing it. It's not doing much, but it does that weird, there's a little thing it does in the low end that I'm not exactly sure what it is, if it's like a internal side chain that it does or something, but even if it's not really moving the needle too much, those SSL style compressors, like there's just an extra oomph in that low end that's just not there without it. So I reach for that almost every time. But it's not doing too much. The bulk of it's happening on the buses, and then some stuff on the individual channels if I need it.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. I'm like I'm like personally trying to think how I can do less stereo bus processing, and it's so hard to change my ways because I'm so used to it. But a lot of people that, I mean, I'm not anywhere close to thinking about working in Atmos, but people that are working in Atmos are talking about like deliverables, and so it's like, okay, the stems need to really add up to the exact same thing as the mix,
right?
And so
which
that's
totally jacks you up if you do everything on a mix bus, right?
Yes, exactly. So so I'm like trying to think about like this, and there was a guy on my show named Tim O'Sullivan. You should check him out. Okay. And he was like saying like, listen, if you end up like figuring out how to not mix into a stereo bus, your mixes will inevitably get better because you're like treating like the, like kind of like getting it right at the source, I guess, if you know what I mean, like getting it further down the chain. And so as opposed to like relying on it as a clutch or not a clutch, a crutch. But yeah, it's hard to change your ways when you've been mixing into SSL compressors for God knows how many years, right?
Because then you could think, okay, do I just put that on every bus? Because it's not going to be the same.
Right. It doesn't.
But it'll be similar-ish, but then it's not going to react the same way. Then you're like, do I put it on every bus and trigger it from the mix bus like a sidechain thing so that it behaves the same way, but it's on the individual buses, but that's still not going to be the same? That's interesting. I was at Sweetwater sometime last year, and they've got an Atmos studio, like a stupid expensive Atmos room. It was the first time I'd listened to Atmos, and it was fascinating. But the first thing I thought was, okay, this is totally different because like even if like either my drum mix is going to be there, but if I'm putting overheads back here and toms are spread around, like that takes out so much of what we would do,
right?
Even on a drum bus. Because like so much of the sound of like what I like to do is the sound of the drums hitting a drum bus compressor, because it just does some cool magical stuff, and so it's just a whole different thing. But then maybe you would just leave them up front stereo and move guitars and stuff around. I don't know what would be the best way to do it, but it's interesting to think about. Yeah,
I mean, I think what we like about I think there's something about stereo that we really like, or have at least grown to like, that I don't think is as possible with Atmos, which is I think how the low end hits. With in that kind of like compact thing. And that's what we've been like, audio engineers have been doing for so many decades and have gotten very good at. And so like it's a very different, it's just a totally different approach. And so trying to like have that in mind while you're mixing stereo is super weird and counterintuitive.
It is, because even thinking about mastering, because the loudness is way, like their standards are way quieter for Atmos, right?
Right. I think it's like minus 16 or something.
So then like you can't even rely on like, because sometimes the limiter comes in and saves the day and kind of does that final piece to put everything together like it needs to be. So then you can't rely on. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know, stuff I've been thinking.
Maybe we've been doing it wrong and we're screwed. I don't know.
Nah, I don't think so. I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. Maybe it's just hype. Who knows what's going to happen? I haven't heard an Atmos room yet. So,
it's pretty incredible. It's because I was in the boat of like, okay, it's just surround sound, but it is and it isn't, because there's like a depth to it that's not. Like I was in the Atmos room, then I bought like the AirPod Pros so I could experience it on the headphones thing, which is obviously not. It's a little there, but it's interesting, especially the part where you turn it on, where if the vocal's up in front and I turn my head to the right, he stays up here, so he goes to my left ear.
Right.
That's interesting, but I guess more so for like VR than for music. Like I don't really care if the stinger stays in the same place, but yeah, it made me it was definitely like a more immersive feel. But then, like, when's the last time I listened to a surround sound mix of something? I don't know. I can't. It probably would feel close to the same. But anyway, I get that it's a different technology because it can figure out what speakers you have set up and kind of recalibrate itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
To that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Down to mono apparently, but
apparently
listen,
down to a little Amazon, hockey puck that has Atmos enabled. I'm like, what?
Why are we doing this?
But man, the labels are shelling out big money to remix everything in Atmos. So
yeah,
somebody's betting the farm on it.
Well, I spoke with Bobby Osinski on the show, and he was telling me that the labels have a lot of incentive to do it because it's a way to kind of like renew their publishing on some of these classic records. So it's not just I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's not just the audio format. It's more than that. It's more.
But they're definitely putting some money behind it, which is so interesting.
Yeah, but I'm sticking to stereo until I can't do anything about it, or I somehow believe in it, which I'd have to hear a room first, which hasn't happened yet.
Well, we'll get. So being in the PreSonus world, we don't have Atmos yet in Studio One, Atmos support, and people just. That's their number one complaint every time we release a new feature. Is like, why don't you have Atmos? And I want to say, like, do you already have your 7 speakers set up? Did you go spend thousands of dollars on your 7-speaker Atmos rig?
Yeah, the 14 speakers.
Not, I think 14 speaker app. Like, what do you care otherwise? Like, like I get there's probably a handful that have, but most of them are just want to complain.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. No. Totally. No, it's we'll see what happens. Time will tell.
Yeah. Let's see.
In terms of mixing and production and your workflow and all that stuff, are you mixing as you go? Are you mixing afterwards as like a separate process? How does that work for you specifically?
Good question. I actually just did a video, just put it out. It's called like, should you mix as you go? So it's top of mind. So I kind of go two ways. If it becomes a distraction and like you like get lost in the mix as you go thing, then I'd probably say ease up and just because I used to think, let's finish the recording process and then let's mix. And the lines have blurred to the point where I really do see the value in doing some mixing as you go. Partly just to get it, because like the drummer wants to hear it going through a drum bus, right? When we play back just in the room the same day. And I want to know how's it going to work if I throw some mixing on it, make sure it's, I'm not getting any weirdness out of it. But also what's really cool, I think, is, and I just kind of realized this the other day, that like mixing as you go gives you a chance to like try out new stuff without any pressure. So if you have a new plugin bundle or you want to try a new vocal mixing technique or something, you can mess around with that on a rough mix of a thing that you're in the middle of working on without any like dire consequences. And so you can kind of, I wonder what, like, we're doing pre-production for like the EP. And so I grabbed like the PreSonus PD70 microphone. So you can't see it, but it looks like kind of like an SM7, but it's like $130. I'd liked it, but I was like, I wonder if I'd like it on like all the lead vocals. So like during pre-production, I sang through this just to see what it felt like. And then later ended up using it on the final vocals. But that's kind of in the same ballpark of ideas of if you mix as you go, then it gives you like an extra chance to mess around with stuff and then decide, does that work? Do I want to keep that for the final? You can always delete it all and start over again if you want.
Right. It's like an extra inspiration nugget kind of thing.
Yeah. And once you get, and it's hard because it depends on where you are. If you're just learning how to mix, it probably makes more sense to just separate the two because it's just a lot to kind of take on at once. But if you're feeling pretty comfortable in mixing, then suddenly, like I've had projects where we get done with the recording and I'm thinking, I mean, this is kind of mixed already. Like I'll tweak a little bit, but it's kind of already there, which back to efficiency, why not? Like if I can get it there before I even mix it, that's great. We can just print it and call it a day.
Yeah, totally. Is it like the same template for, production and mixing, or are they separate templates for you?
It is usually the same. So usually it has all those. So my template's real simple. Like there's not like plug-in settings per se. It's just I've got the buses and the folders for the big groups, and they've each got a plug-in on there with like the compressor and EQ that I like on those, but bypass. So it's just kind of there waiting for me. Kind of almost like a little like 8-channel console or something with like my favorite compressors on it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what I start, whether I'm mixing or like producing something. So I'll start with that and put all the tracks into that. And then usually if it's like an album project, I'll save a new template after we do the first song with all the tracks in place for that, just to start the next song, make it a little easier. But yeah, it all originates from that kind of core template.
Got it. Amazing. Well, one thing that I noticed that you do really well is guitars. Maybe you could walk us through a little bit of your approach to tracking guitars, whether it's acoustic or electric.
Yeah. So acoustic's probably if there's one thing I've recorded the most, it's either acoustic guitar or my vocals. So I've just spent a lot of time with it. For me, it's, first of all, no two guitars are the same. So like I had a Taylor 314, I still have it, but that I recorded for years and got to where it was the one that I did the muddy recordings at first and had to like learn how to re-record it. The next album, they sounded great, but that first one killed me. But then I bought a Gibson J45, which if you know those two, like they couldn't be more different. The Taylor's nice and bright and crisp, but still full. But then the Gibson's like kind of moody, bluesy, and almost dull sounding, but in a cool way. And none of my like old tricks worked on the Gibson. I would set the mics up the exact same way I would do on the Taylor, and it would just be okay. And like in the room, I'm thinking, this thing sounds amazing. It's like my spirit guitar, but then what was coming out of the headphones and coming out of the speakers when I recorded it wasn't. And so for me, it took me a while. I was actually sitting down. I might have been shooting a video. I can't remember. Had a single mic in front of me, pointed at the 12th fret from about 12 inches away, like the normal thing I would do. And I just didn't like the sound. And I turned to like look at something on my computer. So I turned to my right and I was just strumming the guitar while I looked over there. And it immediately in the headphones, it sounded amazing. And I looked and the microphone was like way down here by my hand, like on the 7th fret or something, pointing back towards the sound hole. So I was just rotated to where it was, instead of being in front of the guitar, it was kind of up here, aimed down towards the neck or towards the sound hole or where the neck meets the body. And that sounded incredible on that guitar. But when I rotated back, a quarter turn to the left, it didn't sound as good. So that to me was a big aha moment of, okay, all right, I see what you're doing here, guitars. You're a bunch of jerks and you're going to make me work for it. So a part of it is you got to, especially with acoustic instruments, you got to just, each one kind of wants its own thing. So have a few extra tricks up your sleeve to try, but it's easy because you just move the mic around and then listen. But make sure you listen on speakers before you sit down and record 8 songs because you might regret it. But the speaker will tell you real quick if you messed it up. So that's my big lesson for acoustic guitar. And last few years, I've been really doing a lot of XY stereo recording. And I found, this is going to sound dumb, but when I do XY, I use a pair of those Earthworks SR25s. They were in that drum mic kit that they used to sell. I don't know if they still do. The whole shtick was like, you can record drums with 3 microphones, but I like them for overheads, but also for acoustic guitars.
They're like super transparent sounding, right?
Yeah, they're just real chill. And they're small and they're cute. But I'll do it. I found that especially with fingerstyle guitar, if I put them in XY where like if like there's an axis in the middle, like one's pointing left, one's pointing right, it's like the 45-degree angle if they're at like 90 degrees. I was told there'd be no math, but we're getting there. I would point that part directly at the sound hole of the guitar. So like one mic is shooting up the neck sort of, and one mic's kind of shooting down towards the bridge, and the sound hole's in the middle, which on paper sounds like the dumbest idea ever because the sound hole is just a big mud box, right? Like if you point the mic at the sound hole, generally that sounds bad. But since they were both pointing to either side, I started off doing it with an acoustic EP I was working on with a lot of fingerstyle guitar. It sounded incredible because when you do stereo guitar, what do you end up with most of the time? You end up with a lopsided sound, right? There's one that's pointed towards the body that gets most of the volume because it's so beefy. So you end up with, you have to either rebalance it or you just get used to turning your head to the side when you listen to that guitar because it's left heavy. So I thought, well, if the big volume's coming out of the sound hole, if I can put a mic kind of one going up, one going down, and like move my body to get it right in the position where it feels balanced in my headphones, I wonder if that would sound good. And it turns out it sounded really good. I have to get the mics fairly close, so there's that fine line of it's too boomy or not. But once I find that right spot and a little bit of a high pass filter, it was just beautiful.
Are they cardioid mics or are they?
Yeah, they're cardioid. I think they're just regular cardioid. And they're small diaphragms, so you can get them right next to each other so you don't have to worry about phase stuff. And XY is not super wide. Like It's not as wide as like a Space Pair or something like
Sure.
that when you listen.
Mm-hmm.
But man, just that little bit of width that it gives, especially like if it would be a song where like it drops down to just one guitar after the chorus or something, and that one guitar just has this beautiful, just slight width to it that sounds like you're sitting in front of the guitar. It's just different, right? Like the first time you ever did something in stereo and your mind was blown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels kind of like that doing it. So now
Right.
I've started almost always doing my acoustics that way, even if I don't plan to really use it stereo like that. I like having that kind of in my back pocket. Because
So
it's
you'll
fully
keep like
mono
one
compatible.
side sometimes. Oh, you'll just make it
Or I'll
mono.
just sum it to mono and
Got
throw
it.
it to the left or the right.
Got it.
I like having that option. But yeah, that's been a killer setup for acoustic guitar.
Sweet. I've done the XY guitar thing. I haven't done it in a while. I've been kind of doing like one and one, just doubling things up a lot, which is fun also. But gotta try it again. I lent my pencil condensers to a friend of mine. I so rarely use them now, but maybe I gotta get them back.
Yeah, I go through phases. They stay in the case for a while, and then they come out and get a lot of use. But
Then
they're good.
They're in the case for 2 years and out for 3 years.
Exactly. That's a good system.
Amazing. Wait, and tell me about tracking electrics.
Yeah, so I've been on a journey with electric. Because I like
the people are about to hear some guitars in the sauce segment, so they
yeah.
They
So
just get
that
revved up for that.
the song segment is from my band Stare Down, our first EP that we wrote together. All those guitars are I'm being connected with Personas. Personas was purchased by Fender at the end of last year, so now we're a part of Fender, which means I was able to get deals on guitars. So I bought I only bought one, so I'm pretty proud of myself. I bought a Chris Shiflett Signature Telecaster Deluxe, which if you're not familiar with it, the Tele Deluxe is a Tele with two humbuckers. So it feels more like a Les Paul or a 335, which I feel like is more like my Spirit guitar on the electric side. But it's got these custom pickups that are just nasty and dark. And I like the two, it's got the 4 knobs, so 2 volume knobs, one for each pickup and tone knobs for each. I like that setup, kind of like a Les Paul where you can flip between the two and have one loud, one quiet, I just like that vibe. Like I'll sit down and watch Jimmy Page do that thing.
Gives you more control. Yeah, it gives you more control.
Yeah.
The classic Telecaster is simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then having control over each pickup, I can dial in a ton of sounds with just the knobs, which is fun. And so then it was that guitar and primarily is the main guitar. And then I used the Helix for the rest, or for all the amps. So it was mainly the Helix, one of the Marshall models, set fairly normal, standard, and then a few plug-in effects or a few pedal effects in there. But in the past, I've got like a Fender Deluxe Reverb that I've used a bunch. I've used the Avid 11 rack, which is still in my rack, and literally, like, I don't even know where the power cord is anymore, but I use that on a few albums. But it just looks cool, and it's orange, and I don't have anything to put in that space anyway. So I've kind of gone back and forth of using models and then using, I don't like the software models just because I don't want to have to monitor through the software. Since I record everything through a mixer, I monitor everything off the mixer directly. So like drums, bass, guitar, like it's all just right there. If I use an amp modeler software, that kind of messes up my whole workflow because I got to monitor through the software.
Yeah, totally. I have to say, just on that point, I'll let you continue in a second.
Yeah.
but that Neural DSP Corey Wong amp is insane. It's so good, but it eats up. First of all, it eats up a ton of CPU, and then you got to deal with all the monitoring. When I record bass, it's just direct. It's no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I got no latency, but. It's fine. I got an M1 Max, so things are better now than they used to be.
The M1s can handle it for sure. That was kind of when I first started recording guitar electric seriously. I was rocking a pretty old iMac at the time, so having like the 11 rack and just XLR into the mixer is just nice. Like I treat it like an amp, and it gives me the option of. A lot of people fall into the trap of, well, if I used a plug-in, then I can change it after the fact. And then you just never stop changing it. Like Final Mix, you go in and tweak the low gain on the amp, and that messes up the whole thing, and you end up just ruining things. So I would rather, even if it's an amp modeler, like my Helix is just plugged in the XLR into the mixer, and I just record it in. I don't record dry signal and then reamp it. I like to back myself into a corner creatively, and I can always go back and re-record it if I need to. But
I think
when I do
that's
when I
smart.
do use the amp, it's the Fender Deluxe Reverb with like a Cascade fathead ribbon just right in the middle of the cone, which is normally too bright, but those ribbons are so dark, and the combination of the two feels pretty cool. I like that a lot. But it's a real amp, and the tubes are starting to get old and doing that thing where they sound like they're about to explode. So the tubes never go bad on the Helix, which is nice.
Yeah, no, totally. First of all, I totally resonate with backing yourself into a corner, because I feel like so many people are just always covering their butts to try to maybe I'll need to do this later, so let me just record it like that, and then you end up recording. And this is kind of like what Vance Powell talks about a lot. Is like then you're just not recording safe. You're recording too safely, and then it becomes kind of banal and boring and so like I've swung in either direction, but
Sure.
I'm trying now to swing in the in the more like this is the this
There's
is the
that
sound.
level of being like taking a chance and like almost like jazz improv. Like I'm not going to play this, I'm going to play this song a different way than I've ever played it before, and it's risky. But there's also like this idea of decision fatigue. Like we have to make so many decisions over the course of writing, producing, mixing, releasing a song that I would love to take some of those decisions off the table, rather than procrastinate or push them down the road a little bit. So that's a part of it for me, is I don't want to have the option to even have to go back and make changes to it. Because mixing is 1,000 decisions an hour. I don't want to add more onto that kind of already big to-do list, because I get easily overwhelmed just in general. If I have too much going on, I need to kind of like reset. So anytime I can make the music part simple, like here's what you do next, there's really no other option, it works well for me.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also limitations lead to creativity. Like if you have endless opportunity to do stuff, then you're going to just do nothing. And if I've had a bunch of guests also talk about this, of just like, when you limit the scope of things you can choose or whatever, and like it's like the plug-in thing for you also, then you're just like, oh, these are the tools I have, or this is a guitar tone I have, so what am I going to do with it? You know what I mean? Rather than,
it's like you mentioned Vance Powell. Like I've never met him, but like I love all like the Jack White stuff, and like Jack White's shtick for a long time is I would play with a crappy plastic guitar because I don't want it to sound good, and I want to have to fight it during the show, because like making it intentionally hard on himself. And he goes probably too far in that direction to where it's like, okay, it's okay to have your guitar in tune, but I do like that idea of like, I'm gonna back myself into these creative corners and see what happens. It's a cool social experiment. And we've all known those people who have like amazing collections of guitars or amps or gear, but they're terrible at playing. You know what I mean?
yes, of course.
Not to say that you can't have a lot of gear and be good, but we don't want to be like gear collectors who never get good at any of the things we own either.
Yeah, totally. What Vance told me on the show was that the reason why Jack kept working with him was because he was fast. Because he didn't. It wasn't because he brought. I'm sure he did bring a lot of things to the table, gear wise or whatever. But
yeah.
But he. It was just like, you ready to record? Oh, here you go. Here's a channel. You know what I mean? Like he didn't waste any time once that creative spark was lit. So to speak.
And I don't imagine Jack would be the kind of guy who's like, hey buddy, I didn't really get that recorded well. Can we do another one? I'm sure he's like, what?
Yeah.
Like I came in, I recorded, it should be recorded.
Yeah. They're probably just zooming through those sessions.
Oh, that'd be fun to be fly on a wall for that kind of stuff.
It might happen. It might happen yet. And maybe they'll put it on YouTube or something. I don't know. Or not.
Oh, do you have some insider information?
No, I don't have any inside information. No. No stocks. No stocks are being traded. Amazing. All right. So yeah, we've got to a lot of stuff here. Maybe let's head over to the sauce segment. We'll get a little deeper after that, and so people can kind of hear what you're talking about. So you sent me a track called "Keep Your Distance" by Stare Down, which is, as you mentioned, your band. Let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds, and we'll chat about it. Sound cool?
Cool.
Yeah, Joe, this sounds awesome. I love the low end on this one. There's like this nice grit to the bass, kind of like passing it in between notes, and it's got that really cool synth part, which really adds a lot. I think that adds a ton to the song, honestly. Tell me a little bit about this song. How did it come together?
Yeah, so this whole project was guys that I've played music with forever. So it's just me, drummer Tim Horsley, bass player Joel Bazaire. They've played on my stuff for years, but we've never written like together. So this was kind of the first kind of truly collaborative effort. And this was one that I had written a chorus for, and kind of had a rough idea of a verse. And so we would just get together in a room with instruments and just get together and write, which seemed it's something like it actually happened, came to be during COVID and lockdown, and just watched the Beatles documentary and was like, I need to be in a room with musicians. We may not be the Beatles, but I need that in my life. So we eventually got together, and we just wanted to jam and see what happens. And so songs came out of it, which tends to happen. So, but yeah, this one was just real simple. So like the chorus is almost like a Beatlesy kind of a chord progression. It's like the 1 dominant 7 4, and then this kind of a chromatic walk back up to 1. So like it even though it's heavier guitars, it kind of has that kind of Beatlesy vibe. So the drummer was like, I'm gonna kind of make it feel a little bit like the Beatles as I play. And the bass player, we never ever record clean bass, and it makes me so happy. He's got a bigger pedal board than I do for bass, which is just great. So he's
Nice.
it's always at least gritty, if not like straight up like some like synth like Muse distortion kind of thing on there. But yeah, this one was it was of the ones we recorded like on that tracking day. This was the one that I was the most like, they just had this thickness because the intro is he's playing toms and snare. The
Yes.
bass is just chugging. I'm just palm muting
Yep.
just a B power chord and just trying to keep as much space in there as you can, which is so hard to do, especially as a guitar player. I just want to overplay. And there were so many times where like, when you get into that verse 2 and there's that this little melodic line kind of happening underneath the verse, I wanted to play so many more notes. Like I can't, I'm not like a shredder, but they would be like, what if you played this? And I would play like a few extra ones. And they were like, what if you didn't do that? And you just played these simple notes. And it seems like by itself, it sounds so stupid simple. Like I wanted to do these little like that kind of thing, but it made more sense for it to just be more straight and to kind of blend in the background with everything else. Because then we ended up doubling that part with like a little synth reverby thing, which made more sense that they were just very simple notes going back and forth. So it was a lot of that kind of being in a room, just creating together. What do you think about that? Yeah, no, okay, let's move on. And we had that from a relational standpoint because we've made music forever. We've been friends for a long time. And we kind of at the outset said, hey, we're going to all throw out ideas, and there are going to be bad ones and there are going to be good ones. This is a safe space to have bad ideas. Which you may think doesn't need to be said, but like it's ironic because like the drummer, his name's Tim Horsley. I've known him for a dozen years or more. He was the touring drummer for Keith Urban back in like the 99, 2000 when he was blowing up. There's videos of him playing these massive arenas. He played with Gary Allen. He played with Dina Carter, a bunch of country artists. So he's played like stadiums, but like he was nervous in the room with me and Joel, like throwing out like lyric ideas. And so it's just an interesting insight into like music is such a vulnerable thing. Like wherever you find yourself in that, whether you're the producer or you're the engineer or you're the artist or all of the above, like there's it's just funny to think about. You could be a sick, everybody's got their insecurities, but it was just, to me, it was really interesting to see like, oh yeah, there's some vulnerability here. So being able to say, let's just throw out ideas and we'll ignore the ones we don't like, or be like, yeah, I'd rather do this than that. It ended up making for a better project overall because my default is usually what I go with. Like the first idea I have is probably what I'm going to do if it's just me in a room. But if there's two other dudes that kind of need to nod their heads in approval, then we end up usually coming up with something better overall.
Right. Yeah. It gives it that kind of, that synergistic effect and also that kind of the filter,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Amazing. What was that synth? I don't know if you remember what synth was used on that, but there was something about it was special. It has it's like an evocative sound.
Yeah, so we recorded the bass tracks, like drums, bass, couple guitars, and then we knew we wanted the whole EP has a little bit of synths throughout, and a couple of them was literally this Pittsburgh modular synthesizer that the drummer has. It has like the bunch of different patch cables and oscillators and stuff. So in like the first song, you hear that that's that synth plugged into my mixer. But then for these songs like this one, I just opened up the virtual instrument in Studio One, and just kind of cycled through some sounds, and then the bass player, I played the part, and he comes in and just messes with the settings for a while, like trying different oscillators or different patches and just kind of tweaking it. So I honestly don't know what he did. He just kind of kept jacking with it until it sounded cool. So yeah, it was the, I can't remember the name of it, the main sampler in Studio One.
Cool.
I should know this, but yeah, it was
good.
It was just
good. It's good pitch for Studio One.
Yeah.
There you go. Amazing. And I guess what I don't know, specific bass. I don't know what kind of bass was he using for this kind of.
Yeah. So he had a new bass that he was really excited about, but he didn't use it because he's got this Reverend 5-string. Do you know Reverend basses at all? I didn't know them till he got them, but they are glorious. But it's just got this growly kind of output by itself. And then he ran through his pedal board, which always had something going on. And then we recorded to he's got one of those little Ampeg mini stacks. Have you seen them? They're like adorable. It's like a little head that's about as wide as like a MacBook, and then speakers about the same width, like 10s. And so it's cute. It looks amazing, but it's like literally like looks like a toy almost. But the thing will crank and sounds really cool. It's not super, super loud, but it's still an Ampeg, and it has that grit too. So the bass is that. I mean, we may have done the bass just direct, but I know we've done bass where we recorded through that. But that was the main signal path.
Yeah, awesome.
I
love that.
I did a lot to it after the fact.
What's it called? The Plugin Alliance SVT simulator is amazing, and there's something about it.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on there's like basically two tones you can get out of it, but like they're both so workable and usable and amazing. It's awesome. Amazing. The one thing that I mentioned to you before we even started recording was that I wasn't sure if you were singing, because I've heard you sing before. I've heard like, some of your music, but it didn't sound like you. But apparently you're the vocalist. What changed?
I think honestly it was getting out of my comfort zone, because a lot of the songs, like I didn't have the originating idea, and so like Tim would bring a song and would bring a melody idea, and it would usually be like his would always come in way too high, but then we would just get used to it, and then I would sing it, and so I'd have to like figure out this falsetto thing that I don't do a lot because it's it's hard to pull off consistently. Enter lots of Radiohead, because that's like all Tom York does is sing high and falsetto, and it's delightful. Yeah. But it was, I think a lot of it was having it's just different music and not coming from me exclusively. It brought out like a different kind of a singer in me, I guess.
That's awesome.
Because it wasn't stuff that I'm used to. Like I talk about like I think my resting tempo is like 85 BPM. Like you sit me down with a guitar, I'm going to play 85 and that's it. And it's going to be a lovely singer-songwriter demo, and that's as good as it's going to get. So being with like, and granted that song Keep Your Distance is probably not far from that, but being able to do more up-tempo stuff and just have more energy and just different voices speaking into it, it ended up being something that I just kind of surprised me that it became what it did. Because it wasn't like the melody just kind of came, like either they came with the melody or I would come up with a melody while we were rehearsing, and we would all say, wow, that's special, and just record it and move on. So a lot of it, and I know I would hate this if I was listening when people say, oh, it just kind of came to me, but a lot of that, it just does. Like you give yourself an environment for things to come to you, and sometimes they do, and it's frustrating because you can't really say, well, I got this from here, but
right. People like to talk about how these ideas kind of permeate the world, and if we're primed to catch those ideas, we catch them. I don't know. I'm like I read like 10 pages of the new Rick Rubin book, and he was talking about that. I was like, hey, didn't Big Magic talk about this also? Like that same kind of concept. Yeah. These are it's obviously very new agey, so who knows? But,
yeah.
But maybe there's
What's
truth.
What's the name
in
of his new book? I don't think I knew it was out.
I don't even remember. I think it's like the Creative
Act?
State. Yeah, the Creative Act. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, check it out. It's a cool looking book. It's got a nice cover on it. So even if you don't read it, it looks nice on a coffee table. So
yes. All right, adding to the list.
Amazing. Wait, and you sang this vocals through a dynamic mic you mentioned, right?
Yeah. So being in the, firmly in the Presonus camp. Last year, the year before, they released a dynamic mic called the PD70, which looks a lot like an SM7, but at like a third of the price. And so I was immediately skeptical because I love the SM7. But when I got it and I started singing with it, I was like, dang, it actually sounds really good. So when we were doing the scratch tracks, I would use that mic. I used it and I liked it so much, I just went with it for the final ones. Because a part of it is it's got the big like pop filter on the front, so it just singing into that just felt more like a live environment, which kind of felt appropriate for these
kind of rock
songs.
music.
Yeah. Like I felt like I was performing it versus like behind a condenser mic with a pop filter and all that. So, and I knew I was gonna like distort it and all that stuff after the fact anyway. So, or throw it through like slapback delay. So like purity wasn't really on the table. So yeah, it had a feel that felt good. So I just ran with it.
There's something about dynamic mics that just work better sometimes for this kind of rock stuff. There's less information, but it's like the right information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Because like there's this, like especially singing that loud on some of the stuff, like the consonants are going to be louder, and so it just doesn't get picked up quite the same way on a dynamic. So like I can, once I compress it and EQ it, it just feels more like it needs to be. It sounded like I wanted it to sound sooner.
Yes.
Like just with the mic and the headphones, exactly. I was like, well, that's pretty close to what I want.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, if you're new to all the vocal stuff, like, have a dynamic and a condenser at least.
Totally.
Because every song might call for a different one. Like, you can hear Ben's voice on that. Is that an RE20?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just glorious. I'm sure you can imagine situations where that's like that whole In Rainbows in the basement thing.
Why do you think I bought this as my first dynamic microphone?
He is, oh my gosh. First time he comes in, they've got a little tasty little reverb on his voice, and he just sounds incredible. Yeah. So anyway, dynamics are no slouch. And you've heard plenty of the stories, Michael Jackson with the SM7 and Bono with the 57, whether it's true or not, but
who knows?
They're not less than. They're just different tools for sure.
It's different tools. When I was thinking when I was starting to get into audio, I thought about going to school, and I spoke with this guy at this school in Tel Aviv here in Israel, and he was telling me like the difference between condensers and dynamics, which is kind of stuck with me. Like I don't know if it's exactly the right analogy, but he was kind of saying was like a condenser microphone is like a piece of marble that hasn't been carved out yet, and a dynamic is like it's already been kind of carved out and you kind of already have your shape. So like the condenser you can kind of do almost anything with. But it's all there, it's all, and with the dynamic, it's kind of already on the way to whatever it is that you need it to be. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I like it.
I think about that sometimes.
It's totally true because like, and then I remember when I worked at Sweetwater, Blue microphones was just starting to get pretty big. Maybe not just starting, but I didn't know about them. But they sent somebody out to do some training, and they were saying like, most microphone companies are like, look how flat response our microphones are. Look at our frequency diagrams, blah, blah, blah. But they came in and said, hey, our mics have a sound. Like they are tuned, they are not flat because they're tuned for certain applications and they like give you a sound. And like that, they just leaned into that, which is kind of like what you're saying with a dynamic. Like a dynamic is not flat for sure, but it's cool. And like ribbons even more so because they're like some of them they roll off a bunch of high end, but then it kind of works really well on bright stuff. So yeah. I don't be afraid of things that add color on the way in. I'm all for that.
Epic. Same. I need to get more mics, or maybe not. But we'll save that discussion for another time. Amazing, awesome. So yeah, I mean we've covered so many things. I guess let's head towards the end of the interview. I like to ask people, some sort of different questions. So creativity, and having energy to do the stuff you do. We all have days where, we're super pumped to get in, do our thing, and there's days where we're a little bit less motivated. Do you have any habits, routines, or just like practices to get like in the zone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, having something new that I'm actually working on is when I'm like specifically with content, because there's a lot of like making a video is not that unlike making a song. There's preparation, there's the actual shooting of it, and there's the fixing it later, like the editing and all that. For me, it really helps if I come in to shoot a video, if I already have it planned out. If I already know what the video is going to be about, better yet, if I have like a script or an outline done, so that when it's time to sit down and do it, I'm not starting from a blank slate. Because to sit down and come up with the idea and then do the idea, that's a lot. That's like two big things that need to be done. It'd be nice if there's just one thing to do when I come in to do that. So from a creativity, like music standpoint, like having a whole Dropbox folder full of like random ideas, if I need to like write songs, is way more interesting and exciting than if I come in and I got nothing. Not to say that doesn't happen for sure, but I think it's kind of a circular reasoning, because I'm saying like the best way to be creative is to already have been creative. But but there's a little bit of truth to that, like, having kind of always capturing some ideas so that you have ideas to capture. There was a guy I followed who did a lot of writing, and he was talking about like business and writing and all that, but he said like never start from a blank page, like always have stuff to pull from. So when you sit down to work on to make something new, you maybe have like a folder full of ideas, or a thing of just some place to pull from, so then you can take that thing and then build on top of it. And I think that's a lot easier to wrap our heads around than a completely blank slate where we have to start everything from scratch.
So it's about kind of just continuously being creative. It's kind of like you have to always be collecting ideas, putting them on the side somewhere, and then sitting when you sit down, have a look.
Yeah, and I'm not the kind of guy who like I have to write a song every day, or like I have a songwriting process. I sit down to write like when it's time to do an EP, but I don't. But then in the meantime, like between kind of writing sprints, I'll try to have an instrument handy and come up with some stuff. And if I find one that's like, hey, that's cool, I'll just record a quick snippet of it, so I've got that in the files for when I need it next. And that's fun, because maybe it's 4 months before I ever listen to it again. It's like it's like a new discovery. Like, oh man, I forgot about that. That's cool. Let's build on it.
Cool. I feel like I don't know why I thought about this, but what's his name, Brian Eno, has those cards that they prompt ideas, and it's kind of like, okay, if you have no ideas, then here's a prompt. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So we and it also kind of goes back to like the limitations thing, and how we can't have endless potentials and stuff, and we have to like, those limitations lead to creativity, and
absolutely,
and the fact that we're just humans, our brains can only handle so much. So although the AI is not doing a great job,
just put yourself in a room with somebody else or on a Zoom call or something, because
that might be best case, actually.
Yeah, depends if you're an introvert or not. But but yeah, like it being in a room with those guys, the band, we ended up we almost couldn't help but come up with songs. It was really cool versus having to sit and just crank it out myself.
Nice. So what's it like to be in a band now?
I mean, we're like a recording band. Like, we don't ever play anywhere, but it's fun. Like, we just met and jammed out like 2 weeks ago, and we've got like kind of 2 songs in kind of like the 40% completion range. So like, it's just fun, because they just kind of come out of nowhere sometimes, and it sounds like us, and it's a good kind of therapeutic output for all of us too. So yeah, I dig it.
It's cool to get into a band when you're older, because I feel like when you're, I'm in my mid 30s, but like, when you're in like your 20s and stuff, you're just like, there's just way too much like ego, and it's much harder to kind of like compromise and find common ground, or be okay with your ideas shot down. And stuff like that.
The ego is so fragile when you're young, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and I had another. I guess I was thinking after I moved on to the post mixing, post sauce segment thing about reverb. Is there any? What'd you do for the reverb on some of those vocals that were really big in that in that sauce segment? So sorry for coming back around.
No, that's great. So I use some of the bigger reverb. So it's all the stock reverb in Studio One. We've got a reverb, like a convolution IR reverb thing in Studio One, and I bought like a pack of like spring reverbs, and it came with like 40 impulse responses. I'm like, I didn't know there were that many different spring reverbs in the world, but cool. So that's on there a little bit, I think, in spots, but the main one is this just big plate reverb that I use. It's actually the room reverb plugin in Studio One. It's got a flat plate preset that I think is literally like the plugin shows you like the dimensions of whatever room you're using, and it just shows it as like a thin plate. Like they set the dimensions of the room to like 1 inch thick, and I think that's how they emulate a plate, which I guess that's fair. But it just gives this like eternal, like it's got like a 6 or 7 second decay time on it. So it's this big, massive, long reverb or just decay time. There's no really early reflections. And I love to just bring that in, not super high, but just to let it kind of just like decay forever. It becomes like another instrument in the band. Sometimes it's too much, but if you roll off a bunch of the low end, it tends to work pretty well.
Yeah.
So there was that, and there was probably some delays too.
Amazing. Someone was saying that like if there's like a lot of reverb in the mix, then it's almost like one of the elements of the mix, and so you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're like thinking about masking and you're thinking about like what's being highlighted, because if there's too much reverb, that could just that could be instead of a guitar or overheads or something.
Yeah, reverb has made like quite the comeback. It was like we got too much in the 80s, and then we retreated for a decade or so, but now I feel like I hear so much reverb and stuff, and I'm here for it. I love it.
Yeah, totally. I actually noticed in the mix that we listened to that the drums were pretty dry compared to everything else, right? Mm-hmm. That was intentional, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because we recorded them in this room, so it's just a bonus room over the garage, so it's not a huge space. But this one especially, so we wanted it to be massive because it's a 3-piece band, and he brought this ginormous like 24-inch kick drum. Like, just I don't know much about drums, but that thing was huge. And it took us a while to find the tone, but once we did, we were like, okay, let's just leave it and go. And one of the things we did that helps with getting that thickness, and was put a ribbon, like a cheap ribbon mic with the Cascade Fathead, right over the kick drum, like the top of the kick drum, like pointed. Call it the crotch mic. It point literally like at the drummer's crotch, and so it gets like a little bit of kick, a little bit of snare, not much cymbals, and it's just that in the middle of everything else in the mix. It's just this massive amount of thickness that's just glorious. But yeah, I was kind of wanting a very dry, thick vibe, and that's kind of what we got.
Amazing, epic, awesome. So yeah, so moving on towards the end of the show, I guess somehow we're here. So we made it. That's good. So ask everybody who's been on the show this question. So I'll ask you as well. Looking back on your journey, was there something that you did or maybe you didn't do that you'd want to impart on the listener who's maybe more at the beginning of their journey, of be like, Joe, keep at that. That's gonna be the thing that gets you where you want to go. Or Joe, stop doing that. It's holding you back. What would be that one thing?
Stay away from the cannoli. No, I would say like realize that like the fear and the insecurity and the imposter syndrome or whatever you want to call it that you feel is super normal. It's a part of the process. Like one of the things we feel like we're teaching our kids right now, they're 12 and 9 and 9. It's twins. It's like we can do hard things. Like things are difficult, and that's normal. This is kind of the way life goes. Like things are going to be difficult. Be prepared for that. It doesn't make it any less difficult to know that it's going to be difficult, but there's an element of normalizing. Like I feel terrified to put this out there because someone might hate it and might say something mean to me. Yes, that might happen, but it's worth it anyway. Probably worse than someone saying something bad is you put out a piece of music and nobody says anything and you get crickets back. That sucks, but I would rather have made the music than not. I think there's a lot of times when I think back of like times in my life where there may be, I don't feel like regret's the right word, but where I wish things had gone differently is usually I've got some fear and I'm holding back and kind of retreating from whatever it is, whether it's just relationships, retreating from engaging my wife well because that's threatening from a personal level because like you let somebody in and then you can disappoint them or whatever. Like there's a lot of that deeply ingrained, I'm sure, in all of us. But I would say even I know people who have won like award-winning, successful, creative people who still, like one guy in particular, like he told me when he's finishing up a record, before he sends it to, like he will stall sending it to the label, like major label, because like this could be the one where they finally find out like I'm a fraud and I don't know what I'm doing. And so if this guy who's like sending mixes off to Chris Lord Alge to mix. Like, if he feels that, why do I feel like I shouldn't feel some of those things too? Like, I think it's just if you're a creative person, we tend to feel things pretty strongly out of the gate, which means those terrible things are just going to hit us pretty hard, and that's okay. I think we should still do the thing. Anyway.
Yeah.
There's a do you know Chris Jason Isbell, the artist?
The artist, yeah. It's like a country singer?
Kinda, yeah. He's very country, but it's more
like
more
Americana.
like indie kind of stuff. Yeah, Americana. But he's got a song that says the chorus is just be afraid, be very afraid, but do it anyway. And I love that. Because he's not saying, hey, you shouldn't be afraid. Because I feel like that's like what my parents' generation was like, oh, don't be afraid. Oh, don't be upset. It's like, well, I'm both. I'm both afraid and upset. Now what? Instead, he's like, yeah, of course, be afraid. But then do it anyway. Because like courage isn't the absence of fear. It's kind of what you do
when you're
it.
afraid.
And,
right.
Yeah. And we're all afraid, and that's okay.
Yeah. Man, that's deep stuff there. I'm thinking about it.
Let us pray.
Yeah, seriously.
I just got finished with my sermon.
Yeah, but it's like the insecurity thing, the imposter syndrome. We all deal with it, and it's kind of like it's almost reassuring because it means we're still we're real people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it means you care.
It means you care.
That's a big deal. Like, don't lose that.
And I think also, like, I'm sure a lot of us. I guess I'm only talking for me, but there's definitely some people pleasing elements in what I do, and you want to make sure that people are happy, and so that's a big part of like kind of like the imposter syndrome.
Sure.
Like, oh, if they think I'm a fraud, then I'm never gonna I'm never gonna do this again, and I guess I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and we all build these things up in our brain, but the more we do the thing, the better. I think somebody on the podcast said this, and I've been thinking about this. It's just like the more you do it, the less afraid you are. It's like the same thing with like, putting out those videos on YouTube. Like that first couple of videos are probably frightening, and then you start to get used to it, and then eventually you're super comfortable with it. With this podcast, the first I had crazy imposter syndrome at the beginning, and once I interviewed a couple heavy hitters, like it started to go away. And like once I started like getting more comfortable, it started going away. You know what I mean? So it's like,
that makes sense.
You just got to put in those reps and do those things. Until you realize the imposter syndrome doesn't matter, or you outgrow it, or something. I'm not sure what I'm saying. Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah, deep stuff. Well, Joe, this has been so fun. It's great to meet you in person. And
you too.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate you, everything you're doing. People should go check out your stuff at Home Studio Corner. Anything you want to pitch before we close it out? No, man, I'm good. We're good. All right. So people go check out. Fun. Thank you. Yeah, pleasure. People go check out Joe's videos on YouTube. I think you've got like the best personality of any of these like video people. So yeah, definitely go check it out. Any of these video people, I'm going to quote any of these video people. You've got the best personality of any. I don't know. I just connected with you on a personality level in your videos, and I was like, Joe's the guy. Thanks. And I'm glad. Absolutely. It took, like you were saying, it took a long time to finally be myself on video, if that makes sense. So like, yeah, it's totally a journey, but that's good to hear. I'm glad. Well, same here, but on the audio side. But yeah. I totally. Oh, we're gonna get you doing video. Totally, it's coming. We're gonna do some stuff. We'll figure it out. Anyways, thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate you. Yeah, man. Thanks, man.